Hey guys, today is our last day in social studies, and we're going to wrap up this unit on our colonies. So today we're going to talk about the final section. We've talked about the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and today we're going to be looking at our southern colonies. So we're going to think about what group of people settled in this region and what helped the economy in this region. So what types of jobs did they have that helped them make money? All right, so let's start with looking at what colonies we have. We have Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, which should sound familiar because that's where we live, in Georgia. So these are the colonies that make up the southern colonies. Now, I want you to remember that all of the other, like right here would be Alabama, we would have Florida, we would have West Virginia, Tennessee. Those places were still there. They were not a part of the colonies yet. Most of that land had not been traveled on or settled on. And if you think about my first lesson that I posted, we talked about how one of the main reasons why these colonies were all settled is because they were right on the ocean, right beside the Atlantic Ocean. So it made it easier to take whatever resources your country or your colony had, and you could ship it out to other countries to make money. And it also made it easier for ships to come and to land on the ports in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maryland, and all the other colonies. It was easier to get the resources that you needed by boat. And so all that other land, it's still here. It's not like it wasn't there. It just wasn't settled on yet. So the 13 colonies were the ones that we're talking about because they were the ones that were first settled. All right, so let's hop on in and see what the southern colonies. Life in the southern colonies. Life in the southern colonies was very different from the rest of the colonies. The climate was warm and humid, and we experienced that here in Georgia for sure. We have a very hot, hot summer, and our summer we have a longer summer than we do winter. Even our fall time can be really, really hot. The rolling hills with a fertile soil and a vast supply of rivers provided ideal conditions for farming. There are a lot of rivers in the South. We learned about some of the regions in Georgia, and we learned that we had the Savannah River, the Chattahoochee River, lots and lots of rivers in the South. Instead of using the land to build cities like other colonies, they used it for agriculture. So agriculture is a fancy way of saying that you are going to be using it for growing crops and farming. So agriculture, they're not going to have a lot of towns and cities and houses that are closer together. When you're using your land for farming, most of it is going to be nothing but land, and you'll have plantations. So we're going to learn about that in just a second. The southern colonies were made up of 5 colonies: Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Winters were mild, so crops were grown year-round. So mild means that it's not too hot and not too cold. It reminds me of whenever I go and order hot wings. I don't want them to be wimpy, but I don't want them to necessarily be hot because, well, my tongue can't handle it. So I always ask for mild. That means I don't want them too spicy, but I don't want them not spicy, if that makes sense. So mild. Our winters, even here in Georgia, we don't always get snow. It's like very rare that we do get snow. And our winters can average anywhere between 20 degrees on random days to be all the way up to 60, 70 degrees in a random day in January. So we have unpredictable, mild winter weather. Summers were hot and humid with lots of rainfall. That is true. We do have a lot of rainfall. Because life centered around farming, large plantations were built on hundreds or even thousands of acres of land. So these are really, really big homes, and you would have not just like a mom or dad and your siblings. Normally, these plantations would house like your whole family, including your grandparents, sometimes even your aunts and your uncles. So these are really big houses. in the South, and the people who lived here usually were very wealthy, and they had a lot of land so that they could grow crops on it and make even more money. The three main cash crops, a cash crop is a crop that makes you cash. That's pretty simple. They grew were tobacco, indigo, and cotton. These were sold, traded, and exported for money. Many plantation owners became wealthy from their cash crop. So again, crops make you a lot of money. They sold a lot of tobacco, indigo, and cotton. So this was how they grew their economy and how they made money. So maybe in this region you wouldn't necessarily be a fisherman or a whale hunter. You would literally make your money by growing these crops. And sadly, we have to talk about how they were able to get all this money in these crops. A plantation had many buildings on the grounds, including a huge mansion for the owner and his family. Servants and slaves lived nearby in small buildings or huts. So this is the really unfortunate thing about the southern colonies is they were able to get most of these crops and they were able to make a living off of it, but they sadly used the work of slaves to do all these things. So slaves were sold in the southern colonies, and they were forced to work on the colonies, or I'm sorry, on the plantations, and they were not treated very nicely. They were not paid for their work. A slave is someone who is forced to do something that they don't want to do. So sadly, many people living in the South, they would have slaves on their plantations and they would use slaves to do the work. So not really good. It was really, really just a hard time for the slaves, and it's just not a good thing to do to people. So you're going to learn more about that next year as well in fourth grade. They'll go more into this unit. Let's see, responsibilities. Lives in the southern colonies was hot and humid. The run of plantation successfully, it required many people working long hours year-round in the fields, and again, those were the slaves, guys. Each plantations needed a considerable amount of workers to keep the planting and harvesting schedules on time. The owner of the plantation, called planters, depended on hundreds or thousands of slaves and indentured servants to keep up with all the work on these giant farms. Schooling. Most children were tutored at home. They learned reading, writing, and music. Boys learned how to hunt and ride horses, while girls learned how to sew and sing. Wealthy plantation owners sometimes hired a private teacher or sent their children to England to go to school. All right, guys, so that's the southern colonies. Very different than the other colonies. They made most of their money again by farming and on their plantations. Again, when we think about the middle colonies, they had jobs like a blacksmith, you could be a shoemaker. They did have farming as well. And then the New England colonies had things like whale hunting, fur trading. They would chop down trees and make furniture, make boats. So these were some of the ways all of the colonies made their money, and this helped Great Britain become very rich and very successful.